Hello there, and welcome to the Right to Read Initiative. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and today I have the honor of speaking to Tiffany James from Nessie. And today we're going to speak about her journey so we can get to know a little bit about who she is and why she does what she does. Hello, Tiffany. How are you?
Hello. Fine, thank you. So nice to be here.
Wonderful. So I think the best question to start with is, do you remember learning how to read?
That's a great question. I was fortunate in that I remember learning phonics in kindergarten, and I think that not everyone has had that experience. So they didn't teach in a whole language or balanced literacy way. So I have that asset that I think a lot of other people haven't had the benefit of having. So, and I think I was about 5 years old when I learned to read. I don't know if I remember the exact moment, but I do remember the process and knowing how to read.
Did you find it easy?
I actually I didn't really struggle with reading. I did find it I didn't have too much difficulty with it. And I do now spelling is another story. Spelling has been something to this day I still struggle with, especially when I'm tired or fatigued. I really, really have a hard time with spelling, but reading came easier for me. And I was even quite good, like in second grade, I was quite good at answering the comprehension questions after the little stories. And I remember being a leader at my group and helping other kids with that. But I couldn't spell, and I'm also dysgraphic, so I struggled to write and I struggled to spell all through school.
Do you think that had an impact on your ideas on what you wanted to do with your life?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it impacted just me as a person. I think I my self-esteem struggled. I struggled with self-esteem. I really didn't. I understood that I was smarter than people thought I was. So I had a lot of difficulty with that. I kind of felt like people couldn't really see me for who I was. They saw me as someone else. And had some real experiences with that, especially in high school, being denied admission to advanced classes and things like that, because I actually had a teacher who told me that denied my access to a class, and later, after the psychological assessments were done, saw that what my IQ was and came back and said, I'm so sorry. I just didn't realize that. So he let me join the class, and it worked out well for me because he actually took me as his student aide, and I got to work in the office and help plan the basketball schedule and do all kinds of fun things once a week. But before that, he wouldn't even allow me admission to his classes. So.
Yeah, I know what that's like. It can be challenging. So you finished high school, and what did you do next?
I studied. I went to an art college and studied merchandising and sales and merchandising, which I use in my life now, and also fashion design. So that's something that I wanted to do. I was quite young. I skipped a year of high school, so I finished when I was technically 16 and didn't walk the stage until I was 17. So I went away quite early. Went after that, I began teaching in a private school, which didn't require a teaching certification. So I was able to use the education that I had to go on and start teaching. And that is really where I developed a love for teaching, working in that private school. So I kind of went on from there.
So I just want to highlight the fact that even though you were dyslexic, you were able to graduate a year early. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight for the other dyslexics out there, that even though you have a disability, it does not mean you are not intelligent. It does not mean that you shouldn't try. And it doesn't mean that people who think you can't do something are right. You need to gain that grit and determination and recognize that your entire life, when it comes to this sort of thing, you're just going to have to do more and try harder. And if you do, you can succeed. And that success, and you were able to do that by skipping a year of school.
I often counsel kids and their parents, because so many dyslexic children around the world have a very similar experience with school, and it's not our favorite place to be. We find it difficult. It is, some of the most challenging years of our lives. Lots of things. You hear the same story over and over again. Because of my position, I get to hear a lot from parents around the world, and I tell kids and I tell parents, we just have to make it through to the end. We just have to get to the end of whatever your educational level is going to be, whatever that is. And then you can really begin to, let the world know what you have to offer. We just got to get you over there with as little damage as possible, get you through. And children should know that there's more, and there's life after school. When the things that they're truly good at and truly passionate about, they'll have more opportunity and to really explore those and share those with the world. School can be very hard for dyslexics and dysgraphic. Yeah,
it can. And I remember speaking to the principal of one of the schools that I went to that specialized in dyslexia. I actually interviewed him for one of my projects when I was a master's student. And I asked him what he felt was needed for dyslexic students. He said that to get them out of high school without a drug addiction and without a child.
Yeah, there you go.
If you can get them through school,
that's a low
so they're not a drug addict, they don't have a child, they can do well. And the other thing is finding something that they love, and because
that's so important.
As Dr. Anita Archer always has said, one of her, I think they're called Anita-isms or Archerisms. I can't remember what the tagline is, but success breeds success. And when you have a child that is repeatedly hitting the wall because what they're doing isn't working, they need to learn that hard work does pay off. And maybe that's not first in reading. Right? Yeah. Absolutely. For me, it was horses. I have friends that it was guitars. And once they see that, that hard work can pay off, they get better and better. And then they start to get those little successes in readings. And that's where starting with an explicit, systematic approach to reading instruction can help. So they learn, even if they just learn 6 grapheme phoneme correspondences, if you're in a structured literacy program that has a logical approach to teaching letters instead of doing A, B, C, D, E, F. Yeah. I remember I did the calculations, but I don't have the numbers in my mind at this very second. But it was only a handful of words that you can learn how to read that are meaningful, that are only a couple letters long with those first 6 letters. But if you start something like a very common scope and sequence has SATPIN or SATPIN as the first 6 letters, then they can read more than 40 meaningful words that are already part of their vocabulary that are just 1, 2, and 3 graphemes long. So they can have that little success where they're actually reading words. And then as you add more, it just grows exponentially, right? So if we're able to have these little successes, we can succeed.
Yes, and I love that. I mean, they need the little successes, and they need real successes. This might be slightly off topic, but one thing I have encountered in working with kids in different, just even sometimes dyslexia schools, one thing I'm quite disheartened by is not teaching anything real, and there's just kind of this rah an attitude of yay, and these kids, they're smart enough to know that. I mean, they know this isn't real success. They know it's just phony baloney, that people are cheering them on and they haven't really done anything. So we need to give them those opportunities for real success. The 6 correspondences, and being able to read and spell some words with the sat pen letters. I mean, that's a real success, and that is something that really should be cheered on. But some of these others, we visited schools, and in Texas I visited schools where the kids are so underestimated, and they're not being taught this way, even in a dyslexia school, which was really sad to me. And then also they weren't given anything challenging at all. So they were given some coloring pages or something like that to do. And the staff was trying to be kind and cheering everybody on, saying, oh, it's beautiful, it's lovely. And it is, but let's teach him something real, and let him show us what he can do with something real. And that's going to mean more to him, because he knew.
Definitely. And it's important that we give them realistic, attainable goals and provide this for them to succeed, instead of them just spending hours in a daycare and getting
which we have encountered that, which is sad.
And also recognizing, when you go to the prisons, you see this problem over and over and over again.
Yeah, that is that. Yeah.
The street youth, the same thing occurs.
Yeah, missed opportunity.
Back to you. So you began teaching, and you kind of caught the bug.
Yeah.
So using what you already knew, where did you go next?
Well, and I have to say, I had a great mentor. So my grandmother, her name was Charlene Nagy, and she was a kindergarten teacher and a first grade teacher for years and years. And we, in our hometown, she taught a lady called Laura Welsh, who grew up to be Laura Bush, and her mother, Barbara Bush, was really interested in literacy as well. But my grandmother was a real inspiration to me, and I remember seeing the kind of the joy in my grandmother's eyes when her kids got that spark in their eyes and they learned to read, and how much, how she celebrated that, and how much it meant to the kids and how much it meant to her. So I did catch the bug, and had some great inspiration and mentorship from a teacher whom I loved very, very much, who was an inspirational teacher. So I did that for a while. I taught in a private school for quite a while. I went back later, and online I studied language and early literacy. And then later I had children that wound up being dyslexic, and I knew that I have the same story that many mothers have around the world. Their child is in kindergarten, and they know that their child is smart. They know that their child is bright. That the child can't read and is just not picking it up with everyone else. But moms know something's happening. And I was one of those, and I began to teach myself about dyslexia, and then went and got some formal training in dyslexia, working with a specific program, and began to tutor children. And from there, I opened a tutoring center, began to do some research projects, began to work with some nonprofits. So did all kinds of things after that. Learned how to assess. So it started with one of my children, and it turned out that all 3 of them wound up having dyslexia, all in various degrees and with various other aspects going on. Some ADHD with one, dysgraphia with another. So all of them struggled to learn to read, and a lot of, and at least one of them I know carries quite a weight of that damage that was done still to this day
Now,
as a grown up.
Yeah, as that protective mama bear, how did it feel as they were going through that? Did that bring up any of the pain that you experienced?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely carry it with you. And I have kind of a tendency to be kind of a mama bear and quite ferocious. And I kind of brought that with me, fueled on by, past pain and carrying the baggage of remembering what my school experience was like, and then being the mama bear and seeing, these children are smart. They need to have opportunities. Because one of them was denied an access to kind of a gifted and talented program, even though he had an IQ like 135, so he should qualify with that IQ. But and they were admitting children into the gifted and talented program with IQs about 98, but he wasn't allowed because he had trouble expressing. He had all the typical difficulties that a dyslexic has, getting his thoughts on paper, expressing himself. So really fighting for that opportunity for him, just really fighting it out with the local school system, and learning about being twice exceptional, and getting him private assessments from an educational psychologist to prove it was quite a journey. I wasn't very popular with the local school system. I think one of my friends who was had a leadership position in the kind of the county PTA said there was a little box of problematic parents with it, like a little index box, and my name was on a card in there as somebody that was a real pain.
I have a t-shirt that actually has, those "hello, my name is," and then it says "that parent."
Yeah. Did you feel that walking through? Like, I remember feeling it walking into the school. I remember like the ladies in the office going, oh, even if they didn't say anything, they were thinking, oh, there she is again. Yeah.
Now, how did you find it as an individual with dyslexia, having the personal knowledge and then that knowledge that you gained as a parent? How did you feel going in to speak to those teachers who were in the profession, felt that they should have the knowledge, but in actual fact, you knew more? But were they listening to you? Did they recognize your expertise? Did you feel validated?
No, it was a very difficult one. And you hear, especially like IEP meetings, I hear this, you hear it quite a lot, as brave as you can be, when you're sitting around kind of a big conference table and they're bringing out the big guns in the school district with, this doctor, that doctor, this specialist, all the way around the table. And they seem to be kind of banding together to tell you that, no, they know best. You're wrong. Your child is never going to get here. Or here. He just isn't able to get here. And you're coming back with the psychologist report and, the IQ score and trying to explain it. Yes, it's very intimidating. No matter who you are. I really feel for those parents, because I know it's happened. It's probably happening this week somewhere in America. Some brave mama bear is in there with her file folders and her books and everything she's brought with her to fight for a child, and they are just throwing everything they have at her to tell her she doesn't know what she's talking about and her child will never succeed.
Yeah. And you know what, that's hard as a parent to hear, especially when they're telling you, well, don't expect great things from your child.
Yeah.
And, recognize that there's a limit and the ceiling's pretty low for them. but then you seeing this amazing child that has so many strengths and skills, but they are being set up for failure every single day that they walk into the classroom. And, you know, if you have a child with any school refusal, the guilt that you as a parent sending them to school, knowing that the entire time they're there, you're putting them in a situation where they don't feel safe. And
one of the most heartbreaking things I remember is fighting for all these accommodations for a child. You know, this is the one that they were fighting to keep out of a gifted and talented program, who clearly had the IQ to do it. You know, I don't think anyone would argue that IQ was not sufficient to be in the gifted and talented program. And then fighting for in-school accommodations, and then they putting him in the resource room. And so he's in the resource room with children that have different needs than he does. You know, everyone else in the resource room had very specific needs. They had, you know, IQs in kind of the 70 to 80, 85 range. And they had a teacher and they're working with them. And then the humiliation he felt of being pulled out of class and then being put, and he knew that he knew that he had kind of the cognitive ability to do other things than these other kiddos did. And he felt, you know, the shame and the humiliation of being pulled out of class. And then I did that to him by fighting the school system. You need to give him the accommodations he needs. Now, this was kind of the beginning. This is early in the journey where I knew they weren't giving him what he needed, but I had not completely figured out what it is he needed. I knew it wasn't what they were offering, but it was not.
Right. So
I learned more as he got through kindergarten, yes, and first grade.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but your children went through in the heat and the heart of balanced literacy when it was just coming forward as a response to the national reading panels.
Yes.
Support.
Absolutely. And that's where we were. Yeah.
So there's this amazing document that is saying how we need to teach students. There's the response from the education system to create this balanced literacy that's supposed to support students. But then through your experience as an individual with dyslexia, as an individual that has supported students with dyslexia, and as a parent with children with dyslexia, and then going into this building, facing that table of people and recognizing that in that situation, you're not the expert. You are the parent that is being faced with your child's diagnosis, and the wound, the scar is being opened up every single time. That initial pain that you felt when your child wasn't, quote unquote, normal, wasn't going to take that easy road in education, plus the pain from your own experience and the empathy that you have had for others who have walked that road before, because this wasn't your first time ever dealing with this and knowing about the path that has been taken. So it must have been incredibly difficult. And for those of you that are listening, I can tell just by looking at Tiffany right now, she's getting some of those same feelings, because it never goes away. And it happens every time. And the people on that other end of that table, while they are hopefully trying to be empathetic, hopefully trying to work towards the same goals, don't have a true understanding of what you are going through. And recognizing that dyslexia is hereditary. There is a genetic component to it. So we are seeing a generational discrimination of families over and over again. And you and I both have the benefit of having that support to have ended on a positive note.
Yeah.
But recognizing there are so many in this situation
Yeah.
that didn't.
Yes, absolutely.
It's brutal.
It is brutal. I completely agree. It is brutal. Yes, and walking through it with your own kids is it's very difficult. And I remember crying because I eventually had 3, but in the interim, I got certified to teach a particular program of kind of structured literacy, and then I went to go work in a practice of speech language pathologist as a dyslexia interventionist. And while teaching, I was also teaching kindergarten at the time, so I was kind of doing both things. And my knowledge was growing, and then the next child, I was realizing, oh yes, knew that pretty easily and right away. And then the third one, and I do remember crying, thinking, this is so hard. This is so hard. I have 3 of them. And I was just 3 of them, and it was overwhelming. And even after I had learned all that I had learned, and I was helping other people's children, to help my own children was extremely difficult. And I in a previous conversation, you mentioned finding someone else to tutor your children, which that is that I understand that completely. And yes, it's difficult to tutor your own kids, and I've seen that from years that we're talking 15-20 years ago, and over again I've seen that with other parents who have the skills to intervene with other people's children, but teaching their own is quite a challenge.
Well, and recognizing that parents shouldn't be put in the position of being anything else than a parent.
Right. Yeah.
And your child, they want to show their best to you 100% of the time. And if you're in that position where you're supporting them, it can do significant damage to the relationship and takes that loving, nurturing component as the mother or the father away because you're trying to support them. Some families, some parents can do this and it goes to them, but we shouldn't
expect it.
It is the norm. It is the exception.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yes.
As you're going through this with your children and seeing it within the classroom, because I'm assuming you were teaching at a school where balanced literacy was the norm and structured literacy, or the science of reading, whatever we want to call it, was the exception. How were you seeing things for your students that you gave that solid foundation in kindergarten move on as they progressed through the years?
Yeah, I mean, that was a battle as well. And I was very blessed. I taught at a private school that was quite supportive, but there was that kind of there was a bit of that deeply entrenched with some of the leadership and some of the teachers working there. So we had a phonics curriculum that we were using, which was good. And then in addition to that, they were using the other teachers other than me were definitely, or many of them were trained to use only whole language. And that was just sort of seeping into everything we did. And it was quite a battle for years to try to bring it around, to kind of bring the thinking around. But I was fortunate that I worked where there were some really smart people in leadership, and I kept presenting the evidence over and over and over and over and over and over, and we finally got there in the end. And they allowed me to start a program within that school called Strive, where I was screening everyone I got volunteer parents in, and we screened the whole school with dibbles 3 years, three times a year. I began using other screenings as well, like a CTOP and some other things. So I was really getting some good baseline data on those kiddos when they were first coming in, and then I was able to kind of divide them up and get them what they needed quite early on, whether I was utilizing volunteers or whether I was utilizing some specialist tutors, or using Nessie on some of them as well. So I was able to get them in, and it made a huge difference to those kids in the long term. One of my great arguments for this, or when I was advocating for doing this in the beginning, this is quite a long time ago, but was that what we were seeing is all of these kids coming into the school and all getting this, on paper, it looked like a great education. But by the time they got to middle school, even a little earlier than that, they were hitting kind of that fourth, fifth grade, sixth grade brick wall. And so many of them were falling away. And then we had this great upper school at the school where I was teaching, a well-respected upper school or a high school, and they weren't getting in. I mean, they couldn't academically get in to the upper school because they didn't have the basic literacy they needed, even though we were pouring all of this into this. And these children there was a lot of resources for these particular kids. So these kids had lots of what they needed, but we weren't giving them what they needed, which was we needed to be giving them structured literacy. We needed to get the whole language out of there. So it kind of worked out in, I think Nancy Young has a graphic, with the percentages of kids, and it worked out pretty much right in there perfectly. You've got the little smattering at the top that did great no matter what we gave them. You've got those in the middle that could have done so much more. We know they could have, and then you've got those at the little ones at the bottom that struggled and never got anywhere. And so they allowed me to start this program, and I was really fortunate because I got they called them fellowships, but I kind of got some lovely grant money from organizations within the community or foundations, and they sent me over to the United Kingdom to take some courses with the British Dyslexia Association. They set me up to learn the RAVO program up with Mary. They sent me up to Marion Wolf's place outside of Boston, and they pay these different community groups pay that because they wanted me to bring this knowledge back to the community, and I did, and it was just part of this journey and doing those things.
I think one thing that you mentioned that we didn't get into in our previous conversation, we were talking about improving literacy for dyslexics, is there's still that fourth or fifth grade middle school wall that exists, that so many people these days, when they hear structured literacy or science of reading, they just think it's phonics, maybe some phonology there, or thrown in there. But it is essential that people understand that it is not. And we need to take the language component, not balanced language, not whole language, structured language, and make sure that's applied throughout, so that these kids that, yes, they've got the decoding side, the simple view of reading, or the skills needed on the decoding or word recognition side of Scarborough's reading rope, there's still that language comprehension and recognizing the error or the struggles with syntax and semantics.
Yes, absolutely.
And, developing that vocabulary. If you're struggling to read and barely making through the text, that implicit learning of vocabulary is hindered. Right? Recognizing that the cognitive load is so demanding just to get through the text, trying to understand it, that's just asking way too much.
They don't have anything left to give at that point. I mean, they don't have anything left to attend to the text. One thing that we didn't talk about is getting these kids through. We have to get them through fluency is important. It is something that we weren't attending to in the school where I was. I mean, we weren't attending to a lot of things, but that was an important component of it. You've got to get them through to that point. And figuring out how to do that was a challenge. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go up to see Miriam Wolf. And that was part of, that.
So talk a little bit about these amazing opportunities where you had to learn with some of the best in the business and what that allowed you to do and take from to bring to the students and bring to your knowledge of supporting individuals.
I think and part of that is kind of the earlier in the process was identifying where my holes in my learning were. So I was really lucky to get to have the school to work in, and you do these kind of do these 3-year research projects with and really study this data and see where we were falling down, where were these kids, where was it happening. And, I got to learn that it was happening very early. And fluency was a part of that. And I was doing some independent study and trying to figure out how we could fill the holes in fluency. How can we get them? So they're decoding now, they're blending into words, but how can we get them into this place of fluency? And around that time, Miriam Wolf had just developed the RAVO program. And so that was of great interest to me. And it was one of those things I was blessed to be able to go and to go to Medford in Massachusetts and learn about it. Like I said, it was given to me by a local foundation that found education, the community education was important to a local foundation in Texas where I was. So, I mean, that was an amazing opportunity to do that. I brought that knowledge back and I trained a group of teachers to start implementing that program. But we wound up using that, but also adding to it. And, by the time I left and moved on to other things, there were quite a few components in that Strive program. And we were identifying early and really targeting what they need, the best that we could with the resources that we had, really hard early. And the outcomes were really good. They were better than I expected them to be. But it was quite a long process and took several years to really get it all going.
So through this process, you've obviously worked with hundreds and thousands of families of dyslexic students. Doing that gives you a unique perspective, also being a parent and an individual who has gone through that yourself. What do you feel that has taught you about supporting individuals who struggle with learning how to read, whether they're dyslexic or for whatever other reason, dyslexia?
Yeah. Well, I think we mentioned this, just touched on it in another conversation, but there are these academic things. English is logical, and we need to teach them that. So, I mean, that has to be taught, and it has to explicitly be taught. So that's a component. But there's another component that no matter how young I got those kiddos, whether they were in kindergarten, by kindergarten, they already knew that something was different. They could tell that they weren't picking it up like a lot of the other kids in their classroom, even if the teaching was excellent, even if we had great teachers in there that really knew how to teach some Orton Gillingham influenced kind of curriculum, whichever what it was. Those little kiddos, those little kindergartners, they still knew something was different about them. So that has to be addressed. I mean, we have to talk about that. They have to understand why it's difficult for them, and we have to explore all the wonderful things that they can do that might be outside of school. And they have to have the time to do that as well. So you got to do that part. And I think that part needs to be first or while you need to do it together, but it's not something that comes later. You've got to get that right in the beginning as well.
Definitely. And think about the lives and the mental health and the well-being of individuals that will be
Yes.
saved from this. One thing that often isn't talked about because it's not as nice to talk about is the depression,
Yeah.
the suicide,
Hmm.
and the criminal lives
Yeah.
that are led by individuals who have dyslexia and don't get the support, don't get the love and the nurturing that they need to succeed. And it's ugly. It's an ugly truth,
Yes.
but we can't continue to ignore it.
Right. So I opened a dyslexia center, and we knew. So I had various teachers and tutors working for me, and I had assessors working for me as well. And we knew, or you kind of knew by the age of the child what you were likely to be dealing with when or that child was likely to be dealing with when they came in, because the older ones almost always are carrying bags with them, and when they walk in the door, they are we've got school avoidance, we've got problems at school, sometimes fighting, being kicked off of sports teams. We've got attempts with suicide with girls. This is another ugly truth that would be too ugly to talk about, but their self-esteem isn't intact, and they make kind of life choices younger that maybe they might not have if their self-esteem had been intact. I don't know if I put that tactfully enough, but they made choices that probably.
That's your drift. I know what you're saying.
Yes.
And I know individuals that have suffered that road because of what society has done to them.
Yeah.
Because
they feel worthless, and they don't hold themselves in high enough esteem to project that to the world, and people take advantage.
And recognizing those walls that you have to break down with the older students.
Yes. It's a whole different ballgame.
That takes time and effort, and realizing that the first few months of intervention are not actually intervention for reading and spelling.
No, it's more about counsel.
Building counseling, building that trust, letting the child know that you actually see who they are, who they really are as a person, and how you believe in them and will be there, not judging them, but trying to do your best to give them everything that they need to succeed in life. Now, we've been talking about your life in the US, but you reside in the UK. So how did you get there?
Well, I wound up working for a company called Nessie. And then later I wound up marrying Mike Jones, the founder of Nessie, later on. And interestingly, I was using the Nessie products in the United States. And I told you I came and studied a little bit with the BDA. Didn't know Mike then, but I did come and study a little. I did some courses in dyscalculia and dyslexia, again, funded by some local organizations that sent me here to bring that knowledge back to Texas. So, but I was using Nessie in some projects I was doing in Texas with some nonprofits. So we had some great projects running with migrant children and some local churches, and they were coming together to provide afternoon or evening kind of tutoring for kids that were non-English speaking children. And they wanted me to go in and assess with my teachers how many of them had dyslexia, which was a real challenge because we only had one person that was fluent in Spanish on staff. My Spanish is poor, really poor. So we only had one. But anyway, we did that. But I had so many children to work with, and not enough skilled teachers. And we had some volunteers as well. So we had some volunteers, but we had so many to look after that they approached me with this, and I said, let me think about it for a while. Let me see what kind of plan I can come back and present to the board. And the only thing that I could come up with was Nessie, because it was presented on the computer, and it doesn't require a skilled. I mean, really, it doesn't require a skilled interventionist to go. We always say it doesn't replace, one-on-one with a skilled teacher, but it really does a pretty darn good job of targeting the specific phonics skills and later later language skills that the child needs, and creates kind of a custom lesson plan just for that kid. So it really does work in an individualized way. So that's when I started using it in that program. It was never designed to be used with non-English speakers, but a funny thing happened, and by Christmas time of that year, we had children speaking and writing in sentences in English. And a lovely thing happened, that the abuelas, the grandmothers, started to come in, and the mothers of the children, and they would have a spiral notebook with them. They'd sit right by their child on the computer, and they were learning English along with their kids and their grandkids. And it was just a beautiful, lovely thing to see. And at that time, I went to the head of Nessie for the United States, and I approached that person who no longer works for us, but I approached him and told him about the project and what we were doing and what was going on in Texas. And he went to Mike, and Mike said, "Oh my gosh, give it to them. Give them as many as they need. Give them all the product they need. Give enough for the parents, the grandparents, anybody." And he just showered us with all of this stuff. So that was my introduction to Mike. I wound up meeting him several years later at a conference, an International Dyslexia Association conference is where I met him. And then I wound up working for the company, and then eventually moving to Britain and marrying him. So, and his mom has a great story. I mean, she's that mama bear mom, and her story was told in the film called Michael, Mical, which is it was supposed to be about Mike, but it's really more about Pat. It's about Pat's journey, learning how to get Mike what he needed to teach Mike. And it evolved into her dyslexia center. And she actually got an OBE from Queen Elizabeth for her work for dyslexia. Yeah, it was pinned right on her by the Queen, who normally often it's other members of the royal family that do that. But she actually was given it by Queen Elizabeth herself. But that's how I wound up in this country. And I have a funny story to tell about that. When I was over here studying once, I was supposed to meet Mike by visiting the Nessie offices, because we were using it back in Texas, and he was that I had. And so we were supposed to meet up, and I was here studying in this country, and I was supposed to make a detour to Bristol where the Nessie offices were. And he canceled that meeting kind of at the last minute. And I thought, how rude is that? That's so rude. And I went up to London and went to the British Museum because I had some free time then. And so I went up to the British Museum, and I came out of the British Museum, and it was pouring rain, and I was standing outside a pub, and a man comes out of the pub and says, "Would you like to sit with my wife and I?" Because it was raining so hard and there were no seats in the pub. And I wound up sitting with them. And it turns out they were there because their nephew is getting the Victoria Cross being presented by Queen Elizabeth. And it turns out that the reason why Mike canceled on me is because his mother was also at that very same award ceremony getting the Order of the British Empire presented by Queen Elizabeth. So he had a good reason to, to cancel at the last minute. But we didn't know each other at that point. So that's just a funny coincidence.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story. It's really an inspiring one, and I think a lot of people can get some benefits from our conversation.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.